Sorry, but the video cut out. I only have 15 minutes for each video, and so that one cut out at 15 minutes. So I'll continue on with this one in this one. So I was talking about how we've got him talking about being in the sixth grade, and then down here suddenly we've got Donna undresses, and I was saying it's obviously he's with this woman, and they're both naked, so there's something sexual here. You're like, he's in the sixth grade, and this is happening. Well, no, this poem bounces around. And that's something that sometimes gets confusing in poems is they don't have to necessarily follow along in strict chronological order. He can be in sixth grade here, and then can be an adult here. And then he can go back to talking about when he was younger. Other words that got him in trouble were fight and fright, wren and yarn, right? Because again, those are going to sound alike. And so he's talking about being a kid then. So we've gone, he's a kid, he's an adult, he's back to being a kid, back to Mrs. Walker, so he's back to being a kid again. And so we're allowed to move around like that. I just wanted you to keep that in mind because that might just clears up a couple things for you, might make it easier for you to recognize some other things that are going on in there. And then later on, once in a cellar, I found two wrapped in newspaper. And we can see when that's going to be, probably when he was going to be younger. Then later on, finally understanding he was going blind, my father set up, so you can see that his father actually does go blind. And It's interesting because we're going to talk later on about the fact that his father's actually going to paint paintings, even though he's blind. And so just keep that in mind that the father does paint after he goes blind, which is just something intriguing. I mean, it's definitely possible for that to happen. It shows that the person has quite a bit of mastery over what they're doing if they're able to do that, if they're able to paint without being able to see. So he's going to talk about this year in the muddy lighting of my parents' cellar, right? So that's going to be now that he's older. So you can see how we can potentially move back and forth through time in here. And you can think about when those things are actually going to be happening. And then We get down here and you've got these italics. Just watch out for that because this is going to be people speaking. Which is this? That's what his father is going to ask. His father doesn't know which painting they're talking about because his father's blind. This is Persimmon's father, so the poet's going to answer back. And then his father's going to respond with this last thing. Oh, the feel of the wolf tail on the silk. Wolf tail is going to be something that we can make paintbrushes out of, right? It's like kind of a fiber that we're going to use to make paintbrushes out of. So feeling the wolf tail on the silk, he paints onto silk, and so he's talking about these paintings that he's going to make here. And think about what he says about these paintings and how they might relate not only to how we began here, talking about what happens with him knowing the language, going back and forth in time when he was younger. How does it relate to what he remembers about Persimmons, what he says about Persimmons, what he's going to say about Donna? All of these things should fit together. Realize that if they don't all fit together, then we're saying, well, this poem is just about a bunch of random stuff. Sometimes you talk about this and sometimes you talk about that. And that really wouldn't be that satisfying as of a poem. What we want from the poem is to say, look, all of these things that seem like they're moving in completely different directions, they're actually all about one thing. And let's see what that one thing is. And so that's what we want to be considering here. What is the one thing that we're ultimately trying to talk about? How do we bind all this together? How does the idea of persimmons, not maybe the literal idea of a persimmons, but what they might represent, how does that help us bind together everything that's going on in the poem? All of these poems, by the way, are all going to talk about people who feel as if they're caught between mainstream American culture and their own culture. I mean, you can see here, as we mentioned, that he doesn't know how to speak English at the beginning of the poem. In sixth grade, his English isn't going to be so good. And so he's definitely going to be caught between those two cultures, right? It is interesting that later on he's going to teach her Chinese, but he says, crickets, choo choo, do, I've forgotten. naked I've forgotten, right? Those are things that he can't remember those words anymore. So at one point he doesn't know how to speak English very well. He gets older, and then he doesn't know how to speak Chinese very well. And so what does that say about his transformation as he goes through? So we have that person's going to existing between the two things. In Dot Head, of course, his family's going to be Hindu, he's going to be Indian, and what does that say about his relationship to his friends that he's going to have here, or at least what he considers friends, the way that he talks about this? So he's going to be caught between those two cultures in of the threads that connect the stars. It doesn't mention that necessarily as directly, but if you just think about the kind of background that his family is going to have, that Espada's family is going to have, they're not going to be very wealthy. They're going to be living in this not great neighborhood. They are going to be recent immigrants. Espada's family is Puerto Rican, and so how is it that he feels like he's kind of not a part of kind of this mainstream culture because of where he's going to grow up? And then we might think about what happens with his son. Does his son feel like he's a part of that culture? And then, of course, what it's like to be a black girl. For those of you who aren't, she's going to be American, of course, but American in a way that is not necessarily seen as, of course, as being mainstream American. And so the very fact that she has to describe what it's like to be a black girl, because that's something that so many people won't understand, and how is it that she thinks about herself in terms of relationship to mainstream American culture? Maybe that it might explain why she's going to, what she might be thinking about with her hair, right? Popping a bleached white mop head over the kinks of her hair might say something about her relationship to mainstream American culture here. So keep all those things in mind. I know I didn't describe them and discuss them in great detail, but that's okay. I want you to get in there and kind of play around with the poems yourself, and then post to the discussion boards, post questions to the discussion boards, and then respond to questions. You may not feel confident enough to respond to questions, but respond as best you can. The idea is that you should be able to come up with something. I want you to start thinking about what's going on with these poems, and I'll jump in and moderate in places, add some comments as need be. So that's what we have going on in terms of the poems for this section. So you can go ahead and get started with that.